very pleased now to be able to introduce Cabinet Secretary Richard Lockhead. I know a number of you in the room have benefited from Climate Challenge funding. I indeed got a whole job out of it at one stage, and he's been a champion of the local and small-scale community initiatives that have very much characterised that fund. And of course, he's also instrumental in enabling Nourish to be funded for the next couple of years, which has been fantastic for us because we've done so much hard volunteer work, so many of you have, and it's great to be able to now have a staff team. So without any more fuss, I'll introduce Richard.
Thank you very much. After that fantastic lunch, I knew the grant that we gave Nourish would be worth it at some point. But it was delicious, and I've just come down from Elgin, actually, and today is the first day back of Parliament after recess, and I thought this is such a good event that even though I unfortunately can't be here, as these politicians who come to these events always say for the whole event, and we'd like to be here to hear all the good contributions, I was very pleased to have the invitation, if I could make it along, to say a few words, congratulate you on all your hard work, and perhaps just give you a few thoughts from my point of view as Scotland's Food Minister, Environment Minister, Rural Affairs Minister, etc., about where I think things are going and perhaps some of the big debates out there, which you, no doubt, are all on an individual and organisation basis engaged in from day to day, and I'm sure there's a lot of issues I'll mention, which hopefully you'll identify with, and once I get your report after this fantastic conference, I'll be able to digest a lot more of what's been happening at this get-together. Of course, Pete said, first day back, and I thought, I've just come down from Elgin and he's saying first day back, and then I thought about last night when I was in Fraserburgh getting grilled by 50 fishermen. Have you ever been through that before? So I'm glad to be here alive and well, but I am here, and of course we had Cabinet in Fraserburgh over the last couple of days because we go around Scotland over summer, and a few days ago we were in Campbelltown over the other side of the country, and I was meeting lots of food producers on the island of Arran on the way to getting over to Campbelltown, and then lots of meetings as well as a Cabinet meeting in Campbelltown, and before that I've been at lots of other events around the country, and also lucky enough the week before last to be overseas in Copenhagen and Stockholm, which I'll return to shortly. So apart from that, it's first day back. I need a holiday, I think. But this is a really exciting subject you're speaking about, and one of the reasons why I was very, very keen to support, giving some financial support to Nourish, a relatively new organisation in Scotland, is because the agenda that you're pursuing is extremely important for the whole of Scotland, for the people that live here, for our environment, and so on and so forth. And I think the fact that your organisation exists is a sign of the momentum in Scotland over this debate. It's a sign that there's lots and lots of really energetic, talented, good people out there, as represented here today, who want to do something about these big issues that you're discussing over this 2 days. And a challenge for me as Food Minister is how I engage with you and how I can capture some of your ideas and work with you to take some of these agendas forward. So whilst as a Minister in the Scottish Government I can't agree with necessarily everything you'll suggest, and I'll have other competing interests and priorities to think about, today hopefully I can convince you that a lot of the issues you're speaking about are now much higher up on the agenda of the Scottish Government, and personally much higher up on my agenda, as hopefully I have been able to demonstrate over the last few years to you. So that's hopefully something which we can take forward together and work on, that we've got a lot of shared interests. The Scottish Government certainly supports a lot of the objectives that you have, and they're big, big issues. Food and drink, which I'm responsible for, is a very diverse issue. So our policies, and through our national food policy, which we kicked off a few years ago when I came to office, is trying to address the huge potential of supporting good local food, of telling Scotland's story about our food and our land, and also, of course, making sure there's a huge contribution to the economy, which involves all kinds of sectors in the food and drink industry to be supported. And of course, also the fact that we have a national food policy is so we can look at all the various dimensions of food policy. So it's not just the economy, it's also education, it's also the impact on Scotland's environment. It's also about people's health, of course, which is a big issue which is going to become even bigger as time goes on in Scotland. So the food policy is all about bringing these issues together. They're very difficult to balance some of these issues, but it's very important we do what we can to do that. So the subjects you're speaking about over these 2 days are very, very relevant to many of these objectives that we have as a country. It's not just a Scottish issue, of course, it's also, a global issue. We know that. We know the world's population is going to expand. By 2050, we're going to need, 70% more food for a world population that's expected to be around 9 billion, going up from about 6.5 billion today. So that's a pretty substantial increase. As we all know, I'm also Minister for Climate Change. It's also a time of climate change when there's less fertile land available in the world for growing food. It's also at a time when the world population is going to be more demanding for food, and not just food, but water and all the raw materials and resources that are required to produce food. And the world's running out of fresh, clean water as well. So there's a lot of big challenges out there. And energy to produce the food in the first place. The world's got some energy issues to deal with. The good news is here in Scotland we've got an abundance of land, much of which can be used for growing food, so that's good news. We have lots of energy resources which we can use for our own people, but also export to other countries, good clean energy resources, which you all know we're trying to promote. So that's good. When the world's running out of energy, we've got lots of energy here. And of course, water has never quite been a problem for Scotland. We've got lots of water as well. And importantly, we've got the people who are interested in the debate, who want to produce food, who are very good at producing food, who have the skills. And one thing that's very important to me is that we promote the skills of using our land and producing our food, and that we retain that because it's in the national interest. As a country of 5 million people, we have to maintain the national capacity to produce our own food and drink, and that's really, really important. And as someone who's just come through the renegotiation of the Common Agricultural Policy in Europe and the Common Fisheries Policy in Europe, both of which are quite wasteful in their own ways, that was always at the forefront of my mind, food security and maintaining our national capacity as a country to make sure we get relevant support in place as we take these two policies forward as well. And no doubt you've got lots of strong views on where these two policies should go in the future also. We also know that there are many people in Scotland who don't have access to Scotland's fantastic larder. And I was listening to the radio this morning about George Osborne, who's getting interviewed, the UK Chancellor, who's been challenged on his economic policies for Scotland and the damage they're inflicting on our communities. And many of you here, of course, are very involved at grassroots level, dealing with communities, your own communities, day in, day out. I see Joe Roberts here from my own constituency of Murray, and also Karen, who in their own ways are doing various very valuable projects in my constituency of Murray, and likewise many of you are doing really important things at the community level elsewhere in the country, and in turn the Scottish Government is trying to support many of these initiatives. But the big challenge we face is how ordinary people in Scotland can have access to good quality food. And here we are, supposedly one of the richest countries in the world, where you're finding and telling me about the demand for food banks and people who can't afford to buy food in their local shops, and so on and so forth. And that's a complete scandal. We should all be ashamed of that situation, and of course it's been exacerbated by some of the policies we're seeing from the UK Government, particularly the welfare reform agenda, which is targeting the vulnerable in our society and compounding the problem at a time of economic difficulties that we're already experiencing in some parts of Scotland. So there's lots of different roots of the problem. It's not just big retailers, it's sometimes economic policy, sometimes it's social policy, and in this case it's welfare reform policy. So there's lots of issues out there that we have to cope with and contend with, but they are making life a lot more challenging for many people in our local communities. And again, you'll see from your newspapers and TV screens that that's a big agenda in Scotland at the moment. So I think supporting grassroots action to promote good quality, affordable, nutritious food in Scotland is very, very key, and that's why the report you're bringing forward is very, very key as well. I want to find ways of engaging a lot more at community level with your organisations and groups around the country. I think that's really, really important. As I said at the beginning, of course, the advent of Nourish is a big step forward, and from a government point of view, we've got people to engage with who can hopefully bring other people, as you're doing here in Edinburgh today, together to sort of flag up some of the actions that perhaps we could take as a society. So that's really, really important. But my job does have some tough parts to it as well. So I had to visit Stockholm and Copenhagen last week, because I think international learning is very, very important. And I was looking at some of your guest speakers and speaking to them at lunch, and there's so much good stuff to learn from across Europe and the rest of the world. So when I was in Stockholm and particularly Copenhagen last week, I was speaking about what's happening in these countries, and there's really good lessons for Scotland to learn. And I know you've heard from the representatives from the House of Food in Copenhagen at your past meetings, So I used the opportunity to go to the House of Food when I was in Copenhagen. And that was very, very inspirational. So it's essentially an organisation in Copenhagen who have a training facility and a programme of campaigning and action to engage primarily with the public sector in Copenhagen, so they can serve up good quality, nutritious food to primarily the school children. But when I was there, they had chefs in the House of Food's kitchen who were teaching cookery lessons, or I don't know if that's the right phrase, but they were opening up the imaginations of other cooks from the public sector. So that day, for instance, there was the cooks from the care homes in Copenhagen. So they were in and they were talking to the chef and learning about what kind of other foods they could serve up as part of the public sector meals that are served to people in care homes. And no doubt the day after it was going to be cooks from local schools, perhaps at prisons the week after, and so on and so forth. So that's a big food movement that's taking place in Copenhagen. And just as I had a fantastic lunch just now, another perk of my job, I guess, I had a great lunch when I was in the House of Food, and of course when I went in they had this lovely buffet and lunch awaiting me, which was really good. But they explained, of course, that was exactly the same lunch that was being served to about 60,000 children in Copenhagen at the same time. So, that was very, very impressive and a good learning experience. So, there's a lot for us to learn from other countries, and it's really good that you can be a focus for helping us to do that here in Scotland. And I'm now looking at what we can learn from the House of Food in Copenhagen here in Scotland. We're not Copenhagen, we're not Denmark, we're not Scandinavia. We've got a hell of a lot to learn from these countries, and I'm very jealous of these countries in many, many ways. But we're not these countries, and we're Scotland, and we've got our own challenges, our own issues to deal with, our own cultures. But there's one culture we do need to change in Scotland. It's the food culture. So I really want to just wish you all the best of luck in helping your society, your fellow human beings in Scotland to change our food culture and get the benefits of being healthier, a better environment, better well-being, better quality of life, better local economies. All of these benefits we can secure from this agenda. So I very much look forward to working with you on all these big issues in the times ahead. And as I said before, the one assurance I can give to you today is that the report comes out of this event we will take seriously, and we'll come back and discuss with you, and that we are actively at the moment discussing the next stages of our food policy in Scotland, and to give more focus on some of the issues you're speaking about today, as well as some of the other issues that other people are speaking about out there as well at the same time. So thank you for the opportunity to give you a few thoughts, and good luck for the future.
Richard's very kindly agreed to take a couple of questions.
We've got time.
I think he's
I've got 3 minutes.
He's got 3
Parliament
minutes.
convenes in about 40 minutes. So, but if anyone wants to ask any questions, I can give a few minutes. Yeah. Recognise that face, yeah.
I'm very excitedly asking then if there might be a House of McFood in Scotland.
House of McFood in Scotland. Well, let's discuss these options. Clearly, I was explaining that I was inspired by what I saw, and I've been thinking and discussing with officials in the government, what should we learn from that experience. We need a lot of improvement in Scotland. We've actually come a long way in the last few years, and we should recognise that. School food in Scotland has improved dramatically in Scotland, and we have a lot more local food initiatives happening in the country, but we still all recognise there's a lot more to be done, and that was perhaps one template we should learn some lessons from. So, let's talk about these issues, and I've certainly got a very, very much an open mind.
Another question up there.
With such a stunning proportion of land in Scotland being in private ownership, i.e. a lot of land owned by so few people, what will the government do to address that situation, to liberate the land for more people?
Yes, that's certainly the case. We've got a very concentrated pattern of land ownership in Scotland, and as you know, we have launched a review of land reform in Scotland, and we are looking at a number of potential measures that will make it easier for communities to access land. And indeed, the First Minister, I've got to race back to Parliament so I'm not sacked, because I've got to be sitting next to the First Minister when he opens up Parliament and puts out his programme of government for the next year. And one bill, of course, that will be mentioned within that is the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill, which is all about making it easier for communities to access assets in their own communities for the community benefit and community interest. So the land reform review taking place just now. I'm looking at the Agricultural Holdings Bill, which is about farming tenancies and farmland, and you also have the Community Empowerment and Renewal Bill. So there's a lot happening, so we very much recognise that we have to not just talk about exploiting Scotland's potential to grow good quality food, but we have to make it happen, and we have to make sure it's possible to happen, and if there's any barriers out there, we have to look at knocking down the barriers. So I think there's a lot of momentum behind that debate.
Is there anything that can be done about the commodities trading regarding food and also the tremendous amount of food waste as opposed to just trying to grow more?
Yeah, I'll just be very polite here because Karen's a constituent. So, well, clearly the world of food production we live in has led to commodity trading, and in the past I've made representations to the European Commission to do something about it. But ultimately, it's a sign we should take more control over our own food futures, here in Scotland, and not be so influenced by what's happening elsewhere in the world in terms of the commodity markets. In terms of regulation, as I said before, that's really a European Union issue, and we have urged them in the past to address that. It's pretty sad when you've got the MDs, and I better not name the company because there's 2 or 3 companies in my mind. I can't remember which one it was that said it, but you all remember it was in the news about 6 or 8 months ago when the MD of one of the commodity companies said that it was good news that people were having higher food prices because his profit margin was going to expand greatly. So that was a bit, immoral. So we have to just get more control over our own food production and food markets as much as possible and be self-sufficient where we can. And in terms of food waste, yeah, that's a massive issue. And again, in Scotland, we've now got policies in place to cut down food waste. And it's very much a European issue now as well, so it's again much higher up the political agenda. And that's my last question.
Do you have anything you could tell us about planning in relation to supermarkets and Tesco's and any changes in policy regarding assessments of commercial need for supermarkets and it works at the moment?
Yeah, that's obviously a difficult issue, the future of the retail sector and the role it plays in our food policy, and we have engaged heavily with our retailers over the last few years, and we've seen the sourcing of local produce go up by about 30% across our retailers just over the last few years since 2007. In terms of perhaps what you're getting at, we are trying to engage with retailers over their corporate responsibility, their agendas over food, and we've taken some measures in terms of policy to tackle alcohol misuse, as you'll be aware of, also tobacco. So we are changing a lot of policies that the supermarkets have been following for far too long. In terms of planning permission and all these issues, there is a debate to be had there. That's obviously quite a local issue. Local authorities have a lot of powers just now to influence the conditions attached to planning for any retailer that wants to build. So there's obviously a balance there between what central government wants to intervene with and what local government can do. So it's an issue you should all take up with your local councils. Saying that, as we take forward food policy in Scotland, it is a debate we have to have. Okay, I better get back and I'll get sacked.
Right then. Okay, so we're moving on. James Withers, Chief Executive of Scotland Food and Drink, as well as heading that up, he's a member of a range of government and non-governmental bodies, including the Scotland 2020 Climate Group, which advises government on its emission reduction targets and the achievement thereof. So, James, over to you.
Thanks. That was one clap, I think I heard. Thank you very much. I was going to say that beats my record by 1, so that was tremendous. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk a bit about economic growth. And I've started to feel as the morning's gone on like the resident evil capitalist. But what I'm going to try and articulate is why I think that economic growth of the food and drink industry is compatible with some of the things we've talked about this morning. Maybe in 10 minutes' time you can decide whether you think there is something in that argument or whether I'm just trying to help myself sleep at night. And what I want to talk through is where Scotland is just now in 2013, how the industry is moving forward, and the economic growth has been phenomenal. I mean, the food and drink sector is something of the darling of the Scottish economy at the moment. It's the best performing domestic sector. It's the fastest growing export sector. But does that mean we're addressing any of our social challenges? And many of the issues we've talked about today, which social is a very broad term for that, they're economic challenges as well. But does that economic success and turnover and how we measure what success looks like in broad economic terms actually translate into anything for communities? And I want to share maybe a few personal observations in Scotland's role in the world. So I suppose my starting point is, and that's sometimes described as the miracle shot, the only known photo of Scotland from space where there wasn't any cloud cover. So I like using it as much as I can, particularly when I'm talking to potential tourists to our fine land. And I look at Scotland and I don't see a broken food system. And that's maybe because I'm too glass half full, maybe I'm naive, maybe I'm just ignorant. I see a land of opportunity, I see inequality, I see problems in delivery, I see supply chains that don't work efficiently. I see producers at one end not seeing half the rewards that I see those at the retail end. But I do see real potential. And we've talked about Scotland, we've used this phrase, which has become a bit cliched or jargony, of a land of food and drink, and that's what we live in. We've got this incredible resource on our doorstep. As Richard was saying just now, the vast majority of it, 3/4 of that land mass is in agricultural production today. Much of it doesn't lend itself to anything more than extensive grazing of sheep and cattle. And I don't see a system which is feeding 8 kilos of grain to produce 1 kilo of beef. I see cattle and sheep roaming fields and glens that are turning inedible grass into edible protein. So I think the agricultural story, whilst can be industrialised and can be monoculture, I think it's different in Scotland. And maybe I would say that, wouldn't I? I worked for 10 years at NFU Scotland in agriculture. But I do think we've got a slightly different proposition in Scotland and a huge potential on our doorstep. The frustration is where we're not making the most of that. Governments produce glossies and they produce strategies and they look shiny and they look nice on a coffee table. And we produce one too. So that one on the right hand side there is called Fresh Thinking. That was our economic roadmap to grow the sector. But the one on the left is important, I think. And I'm not from government. We're an industry body, so I'm not here to defend government or be their spokesperson. But creating a framework for food and drink policy is unbelievably important. It's difficult too, really difficult. David Axe and I were talking at the break about, he spearheaded one of the work streams in that on affordability and access to food, whilst my former chairman was spearheading a bit around premiumisation. How do we get as much value out of our food and drink? How do we premiumise it? And how do you balance those two worlds up? And it is challenging, but we have a framework, and one which other countries look enviously on. I've had Canadians, Australians, Swedes, other Europeans, Brazilians saying, how did you do this policy? How did you write this policy? Canada are trying to do it at the moment, and they've got to the point they're writing 3. The farmers are writing one, the manufacturers are writing one. They're doing this because they don't trust the farmers, and the farmers certainly don't trust them. And government are writing their own one because nobody really likes the government. Somehow in Scotland we managed to pull something together which wrote a framework. But it was just that. It was a glossy and it's a framework, but it started translating into some action. And our role at Scotland Food and Drink is how do we deliver on the economic vision. The whisky industry in some ways has become the model that we've tried to follow. And there are critics of that sector in terms of what it delivers for Scotland. We've looked at it in a product that is a combination of heritage and tradition, matched with innovation, premiumisation, something that has put Scotland on the map across the world. And where is our ability to take that whisky model into other products? And how do we balance that against this ongoing issue of our challenges at home and our challenge locally? So what has been that success story, if you call it success story? We've not heard much use of the word success so far this morning. And the success story has been economic. It's how economists measure things. It's pounds and pence and as many zeros as they can fit on one side of a decimal point. And it has been the fastest growing domestic sector. In 2007, this was an industry worth 10 billion. We thought we might get to 12.5 billion if we really pushed it by 2017. We'll probably hit that target this year. We broke the export target that was set for 2017 and a new one has been reset. And domestically the sales of Scottish food and drink brands are up 28%. So it has been going at a pace. The reason I think that much of this agenda we've talked about today underpins all of that is fairly straightforward. We built a model for what we thought Scotland could offer the world in terms of food and drink. So we're not going to do commodity mass volume. If you want cheap food, don't come to Scotland. We're not very good at doing that. Go get it elsewhere. Instead, we wanted a model which worked on Scotland's strengths, and that started with sustainability. And I remember in agriculture we talked about climate change with farmers, and they kind of looked quizzically at do you worry about climate change, or do you worry about sustainability? And a lot of them hadn't really thought of what that word meant because it was intrinsic to them. Part of their day-to-day life was about how do I manage this land to pass on to the next generation. But we recognised right at the start that unless we're sustainable environmentally and economically, and those two things are completely interlinked, then we might as well shut up shop and do nothing else, because nothing else would matter. Thereafter, it was about premium, provenance and health. So quality products, tapping into that health market. Another big contrast in Scotland, we have this amazing natural larder, but we're unbelievably good at killing ourselves early by eating bad food. And yet we have this unbelievable larder on our doorsteps of fresh natural food, but we've not been very good historically at processing that and indeed educating on that. The provenance story. What is Scotland's story? How do we separate ourselves from the world? We knew we had to invest in capacity. That was the reputation we wanted to build, and that was the economic goal. And it has been economically successful over the last few years. And it's interesting, we did some survey work a while ago about this local food thing. Were people really interested in local? And people are looking for local food now. And a few years ago, the idea of having local food in your shop was a bonus. It was, wow, aren't we lucky to have local food in our shop? That debate shifted in 5 years now. People think it's no longer a blessing to have it, it's their right. Of course they should have local food in their local shop. And supply chains have had to work around that because we've lived in a world of increasing centralisation. You take lambs off a farm in Aberdeen, you send them to Aberystwyth to kill them, then you send them back to sell them at the Tesco store 2 miles down the road. And we have to challenge some of those supply chains. But even right through any of those categories, people are looking for local. And this is the difficult bit, and this is the difficult bit I wrestle with in terms of this wider agenda of food systems and equality and food poverty. I want people to pay a premium for Scottish food. But what does that premium actually mean? Does it mean it has to be expensive? I'm not sure it does. It just needs to mean we probably need to value food more than we do just now. And the oversimplistic stat we hear all the time is that my generation spend only 10% of our salary on food. And that is far too oversimplistic because there's a huge variation in there. But as a general rule, I pay maybe 10, 11% of my wages on food. My parents spent 20 and my grandparents spent 40. So we talk about food prices rocketing and they've increased 10%. Well, it only means I'm paying 11% instead of 10%. It's oversimplistic, but I think there is a need to revalue food and the contribution that it makes to our household budgets. And it's also a myth that the reason we spend that little on food is that we don't completely value. We'd rather spend flat screen TVs and go to the Costa del Sol. I think that is a far too oversimplistic view of the world. But we are going to have to think harder about how we value food. So if there's been a success so far economically and how we traditionally measure that, we've heard a lot about the challenges today of the food system, and I'll touch on just a few. Food systems get shocked, and they get shocked all the time, and UK and Scotland have seen them, whether it's BSE or Salmonella or E. coli, whatever it might be. And we had one just recently with Horsegate. Amazing thought that for a £1 Findus ready meal, you'll have a product that started with a trader based in Holland buying horse meat from Romania, selling it to a French company who packaged it for a Swedish company to sell it in a supermarket in the UK. The idea that meal would travel through 7 countries, well, there's no wonder it ended up with horse in it. But it's also no wonder that if we're spending 99p on 12 burgers, that it's not going to be top quality. And that is the challenge around how do we properly price food and how do we address inequality at the same time. I don't often share my personal holiday photos, but I was keen to make a point that we have this real dietary challenge in Scotland. And of all the league tables, our men, I think, are the second most obese on earth, and our women are just about the top. And it's improving. It is improving. Our school children apparently had 11 million extra servings of fruit and vegetables last year. But we have a real challenge. But I have a growing concern that the debate is becoming far too simplistic. We're entering into a debate about there is bad foods and there is good foods. The debate over physical exercise, to me, seems to be lowering down the agenda. Healthy living now just seems to be about foods labelled red for bad or green for good, whereas dietary balance is going to be everything. I don't believe there is such a thing as a bad food. I think there's a bad diet. If any of you have a crushing desire to have a deep-fried Mars bar tonight, go for your life. Just don't have it for breakfast, lunch and dinner, and have it every day. And I think this demonising of food doesn't help. And I think we need to get much more into a debate around balanced diet and balanced food. My other hobby horse is around connections and our connection to farming and agriculture in particular. As I said, 3/4 of our land mass is turned over to agricultural production at the moment. And food education is criticised a lot. I see transformational things happening in food education in Scotland, I really do. And I speak not as someone who worked in the food industry, but as someone who's got 2 kids aged 7 and 9. My daughter's main passion in life is to get onto the Eco Committee at school, which talks about food and local food production. They're learning the food for thought approach right through curriculum, from standard grade having an agricultural module. I think is far better, and it's far better than I had. My food education was non-existent. My generation missed out. I made a dodgy spaghetti bolognese. That was about the height of my home economics. There was no discussion of where that product came from. And every time a survey comes out which says children think that chicken comes from pigs and we grow beef in trees, we lurch into thinking that food education system is completely broken. It can be better, but I do think there are real things happening around food education. But it needs to be better, and we've got 2 minutes to go, a supply chain that better rewards producers as well, because there's no doubt that that is broken. And if your average farmer is losing 2 pence for every litre of milk he produces, there's something wrong there. And I completely agree about the point about food speculation. The bankers played about with mortgages for a while and wrapped them up into things that I didn't understand, and apparently none of them did either. That's become almost off territory, so food's the next thing they're playing about with, and that exacerbates both the peaks and troughs in pricings. Quickly, beyond our shores and where's our role, I'm not entirely sure what the relevance of these maps are, but they're pretty and I like them. There's a way of demonstrating the imbalance globally at the moment, and I've used these maps before, worldmapper.org. It's really interesting. You have too much time on your hands, have a look. That's a map of the world as you know it, with countries drawn in proportion to their landmass. If you redraw the map of the world in relation to poverty rates, we have a very imbalanced world. America disappears, Europe shrinks, and we have Asia and Africa bloated. If you redraw the map of the world, redrawing those countries in proportion to obesity, it's the inverse of that, and you have a metaphorically, physically bloated America, and Africa is gone. And not that dissimilar is in proportion to the use of carbon. So we have an imbalanced world driven by, a lot of things happening in the third world. And again, this was a photo that was all over Twitter the other week. That's what Shanghai looked like in 1987, and a photo was taken from the same place 25 years later. And that growth is extraordinary and it's unstoppable. They want to eat like us, they don't want to die like us, so how do we manage those tensions? Final point before I will stop, having almost certainly abused your 2 minutes to go warning. Scotland has an opportunity to lead here. There's a kind of, Scotland's small, there's only 4 million of us, we're a suburb of London. There's an opportunity to lead. I think Scotland has led on climate change. We've set targets that are world leading, and we shouldn't be shy about that. We are the home to world-class research, unbelievable research in buildings like this. We need to learn how to better transfer that across to businesses here and learn how to better take that abroad. And I think if we do that, we have real potential over the next few years. The eyes of the world will be on us next year for a whole series of sporting events, and I think there's a real chance to cement Scotland's reputation in food and drink, but to use that know-how that exists, particularly in academia, and transfer that across to where we know there are going to be real challenges over the next few years. Thank you.
Right, okay, with Joe Hunt, is that... Oh, no. Have you changed the running order without telling me?
Doesn't matter.
So it doesn't matter?
Who do you want?
Okay, Joe, is that fine with you? I've got my notes here. What do I say? I know who Joe is. He's a fellow director at Nourish, but also, I think, more interestingly than that, he runs a croft, he produces food, which is something that I certainly don't do. And he's also an economist by training, which is a huge asset to Nourish, to have an economist's brain. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks for the introduction. We're having a bit of a blue-collar session here, as you can see. We've all come dressed the same. Thanks for the introduction, Sheila. I'm a crofter from the Northern Highlands,
I'm also an economist by trade. So that basically means that I go to bed exhausted every day and sleep very well, but I wake up rather confused by the world in the morning. So I'm just going to share some of the things that I do as a business. We're small, we're local, and we're organic. But I'm also going to share a little bit about economics as well. And economics, for me, isn't about numbers. Economics is about the allocation of the scarce resources that we have to access and provide the big things that we all want as a society. So, local food businesses, there's no real poll that's been done. There's been 3 attempts in Scotland to find out what's the scale of the local food business turnover in Scotland. My simplest way of doing it would be to say that there's probably about 1,000 businesses out there, each with a turnover of between 100 to 150,000 pounds, who are making their primary sales through direct marketing routes to their customers within a short distance of where they grow the food. So that totals up to about 150 million. That's between 1 to 2% of the current food spend of all food in Scotland during the year. Pete likes ambitious targets, 10% in the next 10 years. So that might take us to 10% of the food sales in Scotland. It does sound ambitious, but it's also what consumers are already saying they wanted. James pointed to that as well. If you go out and speak to consumers, this is a product that they're looking for, which suggests to me that there's a series of barriers that are stopping them getting it. Right, a little bit about my food business. We have a 45-acre croft, 20 miles northwest of Inverness, and we grow about 80 different varieties of vegetables on that. We have about 5 acres of field vegetables this year, and we have 1,500 square metres of polytunnels, 5 big polytunnels. We also have a small pig enterprise. They're useful animals, they eat vegetables and they produce bacon. And we also have a small egg enterprise. And that's what we do for a living. It's not perfect. We're about 500 foot up with a view north there to Ben Wyvis, 3,000 foot mountain directly ahead of us. So I certainly get to know when the weather's about to arrive. And I have to say, I'm a first generation farmer. We've been doing this, we're in our 4th year now. It's not something I was born to. And there's been some touches here on education. I found it quite difficult actually learning and gaining the skills that I've needed to set up this business, and that's something I've heard from a few other people in the room already today over discussions. We produce food, but our real outputs, the things that we actually produce in addition to the food, we produce energy, we produce local employment, we train people, we cooperate with our neighbours, 74-year-old Neil teaching me how to plough, and we provide a service to our community. We sell everything that we produce within a 20-mile radius of our croft. Now, we market, like a lot of small-scale local food businesses, we market direct to the consumer. And I'll just run quickly through some of the marketing routes that we use. They're quite diverse. We're the opposite of the dominant food model. We're small-scale, we're very diverse in what we grow, and we operate short supply chains. There's usually, I'm selling directly to the customer, for instance here at the farmers markets, or I'm maybe just going through one intermediary to our customer, but they'll still know who I am and they may come and visit the farm at some point. Farmers markets, they're the kind of shop window of local food. 60 of them operating in Scotland. There's probably about 110 community markets operating around the country. However, only about 5% of all local food sales actually go through farmers markets. So they are a shop window. Or as somebody suggested to me recently, they're the lipstick on the pig. And they are declining. We were doing 5 farmers markets a month. We're down to 3. The closest one to me in Dingwall shut 2 years ago. The community market in Strathpaffer shut last year. People are squeezed for budgets and for purchasing powers. We have a box scheme. We have 45 regular customers who get weekly boxes from us. And it's a very steady part of our business. But it's only a particular group of people who are interested in getting that much vegetables and dealing with it and processing it every week. It's not of appeal to everybody. It's also the box scheme is one of the largest parts of our remaining carbon footprint, because we have to drive 85 miles to deliver those boxes every week. I've been looking at getting an electric vehicle. and haven't been successful. There's nobody here from the Energy Savings Trust or Transport Scotland today. I would like to persuade them that they should be supporting electric delivery vehicles for these sorts of businesses. We deliver to seven local chefs as well. This is one of them. This is Suter Creek Restaurant in Cromarty. You'll see 5 different items of ours run into the menu there. This is a great chef, Graham. I send him a text on a Monday morning. He works into his menu for the week. I deliver it on Wednesday. It goes out through until Sunday. And we've got some great chefs like that. They're all small, independent. It's usually the chef is the proprietor within that restaurant. But he's also very fussy as well. Chefs are very fussy. Next week, we're about to start a new contract supplying the 6 Scottish Waitrose stores with bagged organic kale. I'm needing 2 more pickers on Monday, if anybody's interested. Okay, 6:30 start, £6.50 an hour. Okay, don't all put your hands up. Anyway, it's taken me a year to negotiate this contract. And I have it took me a whole year to negotiate this contract, and my window of getting it into the distribution hub for Waitrose is 2 hours. That's quite a challenge for a small business. And I'm still wondering, there's a little alarm bell going at the back of my mind, is this what I set out to do in creating a local food product? Did I expect to have my product it'll travel about 340 miles in a plastic bag in order to reach all of the Waitrose stores. Lettuces, right. We have a direct supply contract to Highland Council. Myself and another producer in the Highlands, we bid in with the only contract holders in the Highland Council, which is a direct farm contract. We supply in about 20,000 lettuces a year into school meals. Luckily, it's my job to grow them. It's the school dinner lady's job to make them eat them, which might be a slightly trickier thing to do. But for me, this is a good market. My kids, there's 131 schools we supply into. We don't have to do the distribution, and 34 care homes. And those people, to me, are the most important people for getting the most nutritious school produce that we can grow in this country. So I'm pleased about that. The margin's not great. The kids are off on holiday when most of the lettuce is doing its best, and we had to actually plough 4,000 into the ground this year because we've got nowhere to send them. But that's where I think my product should be going, so I'm going to stick with that one. I'm just going to talk about one example about pricing, because I'm an economist and this is very important to me. I'm going to choose cucumbers. I could have chose lettuce or I could have chose kale, but I'm actually constrained by commercial confidentiality agreements not to discuss the prices of those with anybody. Okay, so I've got a cucumber conundrum at the moment. Okay, I've got 7 different routes to market that I can access. I've got different prices that they will pay me when I sell it to them. Here's the proportion that, using those different routes, that I get out of that. Here's the retail price of those, and here's the volume that each of those will take a week. Okay? You don't have to, just get the gist. The 3 markets I want to operate in are farmers markets, box schemes and chef deliveries, because I get 100% of the retail sales, but I only sell 250 cucumbers. Okay? Now, I was actually offered a contract, we negotiated a contract with the Whole Foods supermarket, its 2 outlets in Glasgow, and they wanted to take 600 of them, only they cancelled the order in the 3rd week of June. So those of you who produce cucumbers will know that that's about the first week that you get a crop off cucumbers. So I've got about 600 spare cucumbers at the moment, which I grew for somebody else. You never get a signed contract off a multiple retailer. You just get an offer of supply. They don't have to take it up. So now I'm left with 600 extra cucumbers, which I can't sell at a premium rate. So I'm actually selling them to our conventional wholesaler at 23p each to do that. That is why it's difficult to make a local system into a larger system by growing the business. Okay? If I got big, I'd get less. What I need, I don't want to grow 1,000 cucumbers next year. I'll grow something else. What I need is another producer down the road to grow and serve their community. I don't want my business to turn big. I would like to see another 10,000 local food businesses opening in other communities in Scotland. 3 distinctive things about our croft. First thing, we're a bit fixated about carbon. We've planted 225,000 trees in our first 4 years. We've put up a 20 kilowatt windmill, which now powers the house and the croft, and we sell a bit off to the grid as well. We've got a green manuring rotation system, which is absorbing a much larger amount of soil organic matter than I thought possible. Thanks to Christine for everything you taught me about soil organic matter. And we're currently absorbing, using the best modelling tool we can use, about 90 tonnes of CO2 equivalent carbon within our business. Okay? And if you consider that the average arable farm in Scotland is probably outputting somewhere between 2.1 and 2.7 tonnes of carbon for every hectare that it's farming, we're actually absorbing somewhere in the middle of that range, probably about 2.5 tonnes of carbon for every hectare of land that we're farming. Okay, so if you don't go away with any other message from this apart from cucumbers, the other message is that it is possible to actually absorb carbon within local food businesses at a similar rate that they're being produced in arable large-scale businesses. Another thing about what we do is that we have a lot of labour. Okay, we use small machines and we use quite a bit of labour. Well, there's me, and I've got 2 staff, each of whom work 2.5 days a week on a turnover of about £80,000. So that's relatively labour intensive compared with most farms. And we also have other benefits in the area. We have a local economic multiplier because we're selling and using locally and using local suppliers, and we also act as an education centre. Just click onto that. The problem for me is that the price that we get doesn't value any of the 3 additional benefits that we produce other than food. Okay, we sequester about 90 tonnes of carbon. We employ people in the local economy, and we give extra additional health and community benefits. I don't get a penny for all of those additional benefits, and I do wonder if I was paid £100 a tonne, which is what David Mackay, Government Advisor on CO2, reckons that we should be charging businesses to emit carbon, I'd have a £9,000 income out of that. I could pay my staff more than £6.50. I might be able to cover some of the depreciation on the £145,000 I've invested on my business since I've started it. And I might even persuade some of my neighbours to follow suit, but I don't get paid for those parts of my business. We have a classic market failure within that situation. We're producing desirable things that I'm not getting paid for. So I'm just going to leave off with a few suggestions here. These are just brainstorm ideas to get you thinking and discuss within your groups. Are we interested in a rising balance of payments? Certainly an export success in Scottish food. Or are we more interested in terms of the terms of trade, the way that we set up our markets so that we get out of businesses what we want them to produce, not what they just happen to make most money at and give us. On one side, I've got a various range of fiscal levers. I won't go into them in any detail. And on the other side, a range of regulatory levers. Most of these have been tried in one or other country around the world. They've never been tried in a synthesised way in one economy. You need a small economy. 5 million would be a good place to do it. And finally, we're a land of opportunity, and I agree fully and absolutely entirely with James's view on this. I don't see local food as a problem. I see it as an opportunity. If we're going to reach our 10% target of feeding local sustainable food to people in Scotland in the next 10 years, we're going to need, on the current scale of business, 10,000 new businesses to do that, each trading at around £100,000. Anyone want a job? And we're going to need a whole set of practical interventions to enable us to do that. We're going to need skilled staff. We're going to need access to smaller land units. We're probably going to need rural land banks. NFU has a very good insurance company which I use, but unusually they don't have a bank. And in many countries, you go to Casabancas or Agricole Rural in France, and they have a very good lending system. If you came in the bus, it's done in the same way. If you came on the roads, we have a social system of allocating roads, not based on price. The water we were drinking at lunchtime, that's a heavy regulated social market. Many of the other things that we need to breathe, drink, eat, to live our daily lives, we do in actually very constrained regulated markets. And there's a very good reason for that, because we're interested in people before profit in that, or return on capital in that situation. So it's not unusual to ask for a regulated market around food, I don't think. And my second point of view is that I may be one of only a few small-scale organic producers who is actually supplying directly into the school meal service contracts in Scotland, and I'm quite happy to help other businesses go down that route. But at the moment, I make so little money that my kids are eligible for free school meals. So, thanks very much.
pleased Joe made that last comment, because my observation of that is he's supplying Waitrose and he's offering jobs at less than living wage. And I know that it's not him who's creaming off the lion's share of the money there, but that is a very fundamental issue that we have in the food business. Anyway, I'm here to introduce Dr. Colin Cunningham. He's an environmental scientist and consultant and has conceived and developed the Scottish Environmental Technology Network. Along with our other speakers that have that scientific credentials to Nourish, it's so important that we approach this debate not just from the cultural and social aspects, but also with a degree of scientific rigour. So, Colin, over to you.
Thanks very much, Pete, for inviting me today. And I know what you're all thinking, and no, I wasn't that bloke in the photograph, but I thought I'll just get that out the way. Thanks for that. I've never heard so much about obesity. There's a message there for me somewhere. This is maybe something slightly different, and I'm going to talk about, I've called this the art of the possible. Technology, without a doubt, isn't the answer to everything, but certainly it does have a role to play, and whether we like it or not, we are kind of stuck with technology because there are people developing these things now. We may as well be part of that development. I'll tell you something just a little bit about what we do. We'll look at environmental and clean tech in kind of food and drink. Are they new technologies? Are they really new? Are they maybe disruptive technologies? And if we're trying to pull it all together, how could we do this better? And I'm going to try and be not particularly contentious, but anything I say, I'm not saying something's right or wrong, and there certainly isn't black and white, and there's lots of social and economic issues around all the different areas. So what we do, we're a national network for environmental and clean technology. We've got about 250 member businesses. We also connect people to the knowledge base, to research institutes and the universities. We try and help stimulate innovation, much overused phrase innovation. It's not the same as invention. And a lot of what we do harkens back to the days of industrial ecology, industrial symbiosis. There's really nothing new in the world. Things come round again and again. We help people with literature, but we do have real space where they can come and work and do their experiments. We also help with funding and give people small grants, and we've seen the value of very small amounts of money. £5,000 seed fund be quite important to some people's businesses. So we help to grow businesses, we do internships, we have events, and we're very pleased to come and speak at events. We do that with a fairly small core staff. We have a number of interns and students, so we run to a group about 12, 14. We work with people across Scotland, and our home is the University of Strathclyde and the Faculty of Engineering. So something that we think about a lot at the moment, circular economy. Anybody familiar with circular economy? Maybe not quite so familiar with why it's come back again, which is a bit ironic given it's called the circular economy. What's the circular economy got to do with phosphate? Well, phosphate, a nutrient, something that we're running out of if we're not careful. What's that got to do with coal mining? Well, coal mining produces mine drainage, which produces ochre. The orangey stuff you'll see in some streams. But we make that into a product. And the product goes to the water treatment, where it captures the phosphate, potentially being able to be returned to the land. And the whole thing goes round in a circle. So these are the types of things that we're trying to do to think about a circular economy. So, disruptive technologies. Salmon farming. It's good. Supposed to be. It's good, nutritious food, certainly. It's Scotland's largest food export, I believe. And it's a highly regulated industry. So far, so good. We were introduced to an alternative technology, and they are named in your literature today. A company called Fish From. And what you see there is a schematic of essentially an enormous B&Q warehouse-sized facility. Recirculation aquaculture. Really? And the more I looked at it, the more I thought, they've got really clever wastewater treatment. 99.8% recirculation. No predators, no parasites, not dosing with any medicines. Animal welfare people say they like it. Powered by renewables. put this close to the cities, you can deliver high quality salmon near where people live. Isn't that going the opposite way to what we're talking about today? How's that small or local? But maybe that's the reality, that we actually could get higher welfare and a better environmental standard through something like this. Another strange one, energy crops on farms. Well, it's a bad thing, right? Because it competes for land that you could be growing other food or fodder. But we're beginning to see more farm-scale anaerobic digestion, which seems to be a good thing. Slurry's a problem. So slurry going to gas, going to electricity and heat, it's a good thing, part of renewables. And you can make a dried fertiliser product, so we're keeping nutrients, could be a good thing. One thing we've discovered, and you may have seen this on Countryfile, is that you can grow sprouting barley hydroponically in the dark with the waste heat from the anaerobic digestion. Is that perhaps better than trying to grow what was being fed to the animals in some degraded, not particularly good land in very wet parts of Scotland? If you're going to do the hydroponics, why not throw in some fish and use the nutrients from the fish poop to grow your barley? And if you're going to grow barley, why not grow some salad at the same time? Now we're back indoors again with hydroponic technology. It all sounds technology, but maybe it's a good thing. We're looking at the moment at growing reed canary grass. You can see one of my colleagues there. Coarse perennial grass, it grows up to 2 metres high. We don't want to burn it. We want to put it with a slurry, an anaerobic digestion plant. We get more nutrients out the back end. Could that be good for areas with very high rainfall, where the cattle tend to be kept indoors, particularly dairy cattle kept inside all year, 10 months of the year in some places? It's kind of turning on its head everything I thought about what was the right direction to go in, and I don't know what the answer is, but we're certainly looking at that at the moment. When we look at the issue of lettuce, and Pete's mentioned about having lettuces that all came at the one time, we won't go into too much of the technical thing, that it's a salt solution in an electrolytic cell. It makes something known as esol, an electrically chemically activated water. It was done in the Soviet Union, the 1950s. Very simple technology. Also, we have hydration systems that keep your salads hydrated and stop them wilting and losing their value. If you fog or spray these types of produce with this material, you can extend the shelf life really greatly. We're talking extended it by weeks and weeks and weeks. Perhaps you could have eked out your salads and supplied them getting the full value if we can deliver the technology at an effective price for the scale that you're operating at. But are small producers using this? Has anybody ever heard of it? That's what I think's one of the reasons why we're missing a trick in Scotland. It's been around since the 1950s. It's simple. There's at least 2 Scottish businesses produce this as a technology. So what would it mean for the supply chain if we were using this? Could it mean the small producers can hold back their produce and get the full value that maybe unlocks some of the economics? So perhaps at least some of the technologies can be a force for good. You can imagine the supermarkets, though, will come round and see what's happening and decide, oh, we like the look of that. Well, that means that we can ship our stuff even further, and perhaps a rebound effect is they could try and penetrate further into markets that they didn't believe they could serve. Maybe we need to get there first. I am pressing. So in one way, there's so many technologies, not all high-tech. We did some work recently on scallop shells, and the obvious answer to me was to turn them into a replacement for agricultural lime. They are shells, after all, things which came from the sea, and I wonder where the lime might have come from. Oh, yeah, that's right, it might have been something to do with the sea. Biochar, I don't know if you're familiar with biochar, and pyrolysis, an advanced thermal process, so not burning but heating perhaps that could collect nutrients from runoff in fields. So that's fairly high tech. But the way we deploy it, could we just have bags? I don't have a thing about ladies' tights, but a pair of tights is actually quite a useful experimental tool in the lab. A multitude of things can be put in it, and it can be deployed in the environment to see far cheaper than many of the more expensive geotextile materials. So maybe we've got, I'm not suggesting we see a country full of tights, but maybe that's a nice low-tech solution, and then see that applied back onto the land. There's a company working here at Queen Margaret, and Miriam at the back in red there can tell you about them. Advanced Microwave Technologies. This is high-tech. This is volumetric heating. But what they can offer is a higher throughput, enhancing production, and they gave a juice producer in Scotland the ability to double overnight their production by doing a kind of flash pasteurisation, and they didn't alter the taste of the product. They hadn't changed in any way. It was the best that they could ever do. It's the leading technology, and they're now taking that around the world. So, do people really see the art of the possible? Maybe you've heard of the biochar, it's quite popular, there's a lot of groups doing that. But you hadn't heard of the electrochemically activated water. So, looking back to what the question is of today, what would it take for people to eat well and sustainably? I do think high and low technology has got some role to play. It's certainly not all new technology. Some of it is potentially disruptive, and I think we need to scratch our heads and think about B&Q warehouse-sized fish production and what are the relative merits of that socially and economically. That's twice I've pressed again. That's 3 times. Right. So, coming back to the art of the possible, one thing we're doing is developing, I call this an eco-innovation platform, because eco-innovation considers innovation in how we do business and our processes, as well as technological innovation. We're working with IBM to create this online platform where the demand side can come in and say, make my lettuce last longer. And we can look and say, well, that's very convenient because we're working right now on something that would do just that. And the more people who can come forward and say, that's exactly what we need. I hadn't heard of this. This is, yeah, we would like that. That starts to give a business an idea of the size of the market, which then helps them to make an investment, which helps them to take it forward. And I think in that way, this connected way, sharing the information, enabling communities to form, taking the social business model, perhaps we'll see Team Scotland and the working with the food and drink industry and others, perhaps we'll see that really take us to where we want to get to. Thank you.
Okay, we're moving now into discussion team sessions. We're obviously squidged for time because the Minister stayed to let you ask a few questions. So I'm going to propose that we run those team sessions to 3:15 and break for tea and coffee after that, and we'll scunch a bit of time out of the open space session. I'm looking at Claire, is that going to be acceptable? Is there a problem with that? Because I think you need those discussions in the group, so I don't want to deprioritise that. So I'm not going to allow any questions now. You go off to your team sessions, and we'll finish those facilitators, please, at 3:15. Thanks very much.